Praise be Jesus and Mary.
Now and forever.
We're going to continue today with our reflections on the 10 Commandments. Today we'll reflect on the 9th Commandment, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife. This commandment is intimately tied to the 6th, forbidding adultery, which is why some preachers, when they preach, they'll speak about the 6th and the 9th Commandments together in tandem. And the Compendium of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, number 528, says that the 9th Commandment forbids cultivating thoughts and desires connected to actions forbidden in the 6th Commandment. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. We read that in Exodus 20, verse 17. The word for covet in the Hebrew text is hamad, which means desire, to covet, to delight in something. It's the same word we run across at the beginning of our downfall, actually. Genesis 3, verse 6, where it says that Eve, after listening to the serpent, saw that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was to be desired, hamad, to make one wise. That's when she took and ate what was forbidden. Eve first coveted the fruit before fully caving in to the temptation. In the Hebrew tradition, coveting someone or something also includes making certain choices or taking certain steps in order to obtain what shouldn't be desired. So coveting for the Jews includes behaviors as well as thoughts and desires. The famous Old Testament example of this is Bathsheba and David. First the king saw her, then he desired her. Then he took the right steps, or rather the wrong steps, to actually acquire her. Not much different from Eve's collapse when you parallel the two. Father Hardon, in his modern Catholic dictionary, defines covetousness as a strong, inordinate, or disordered desire for possessions, especially material possessions. At times you'll hear of covetousness as being synonymous with concupiscence, but there is a distinction between them. Concupiscence isn't a choice. Being covetous is a choice. Concupiscence is the movement of our sensitive appetite, which is contrary to the operation of reason. It's a defect we all have. It's connected to the sin of our first parents. Concupiscence, says the Catechism, unsettles man's moral faculties, and without being in itself a sin or an offense, it inclines men to commit sins. We read that, paragraph 2515 of the Catechism. St. Paul identifies it with the rebellion of the flesh against the Spirit. We read about that, especially in Galatians chapter 5. And the beloved apostle St. John says that there are 3 kinds of concupiscence. He talks about the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, 1 John 2, verse 16. So concupiscence is a disorder that we have according to our fallen nature. Covetousness is essentially embracing that disorder in our mind and in our heart. And with the 9th Commandment, we have to remember sexual desire is not a bad thing. It's disordered desire that's a problem. That means desiring someone who belongs to someone else, or desiring something in a way which is not honoring of God. That's where the sin comes in. When our desire offends the virtue of chastity, that's when it becomes problematic. Regarding our thoughts, if an impure thought comes into our mind uninvited, that's a temptation. We shouldn't freak out about it, obviously, but we need to close the door on that temptation. We need to turn our focus away from it. If we hang around the threshold of the door and chat with it or flirt with it or invite it in, then we're in the sin category. If we willfully conjured up an impure thought to dwell on it and then we fully entertain it, then yes, objectively speaking, we're already in the mortal sin category. We need to be careful with our thoughts. Careful and vigilant, not scrupulous. Scrupulosity is a sign that we have other spiritual struggles that we need to overcome. The 4th book of Maccabees, which was written maybe in the 1st or 2nd century AD in Greek, and is actually not recognized as canonical. Nevertheless, it talks about something pertinent to the 9th Commandment. It speaks of the sovereignty of reason over passion. The RSV and the NRSV translations of the Bible in English actually contain both of the books, the 3rd and 4th Maccabees. The Greek Orthodox Church recognizes the 3rd book of Maccabees as canonical and usually puts the 4th book in the appendix as non-canonical. Just as a side note, the 4th book of Maccabees, chapter 2, speaks of the patriarch Joseph as a model for the principle of the power of reason over passion, especially over the sexual urge. Remember, it was Potiphar's wife in Egypt who tried to seduce Joseph. He wouldn't give in. We read this in 2nd Maccabees 2, verses 2 through 6. It says, "It is for this reason, certainly, that the temperate Joseph is praised, because by mental effort, so through thought and reasoning, he overcame sexual desire. For when he was young, in his prime for intercourse, by his reason he nullified the frenzy of his passions. Not only in his reason proved to rule over the frenzied urge of sexual desire, but also over every desire. Thus the law says, 'You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or anything that is your neighbor's.' In fact, since the law has told us not to covet, I could prove to you all the more that reason is able to control desires," unquote. And then the author goes on there to give other examples of the biblical figures who, when they were tempted by their passions, they used reason to control them. Right reason to control their passions. So, for countering carnal covetousness, 3 things are indispensable. 1, grace. 2, reason. 3, temperance. And we know usually our emotions tend to be quicker than our reason, right? The emotions get out of the gate sooner. We react sooner emotionally. But when that happens, or when our thoughts even start walking down dangerous trails where they shouldn't walk down, reason has to kick in. They've got to pull those thoughts and those emotions back. They have to take hold of the reins, as it were. When Potiphar's wife was making her advances, Joseph, thanks to God's grace, but also thanks to his own virtue, immediately saw how unreasonable and sinful it would have been to give in to her. He paid a price for it. We know the story, right? As the idiom goes, there's hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, right? Joseph got thrown into prison because he didn't cave in. But in the end, he was rewarded for his virtue. The more we learn to say no to unchaste thoughts, the more we learn to not feed those thoughts and turn away from them, the easier it will become to resist them. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. We read that in James 4, verse 7. The devil can attack us in this area in seductive ways, like he did with Eve and the apple, or he can attack us in violent ways as well. Either way, the Lord calls us to resist. And of course, as we always say, these things aren't always from the devil. Can't always blame the devil for everything. Sometimes it's just our own disorder that gets us off track. Lastly, under the 9th Commandment, the Catechism goes on to speak about how we are to purify our hearts. We substantially covered that part when we preached a few months ago on the Beatitudes. We preached on specifically the 6th Beatitude, blessed are the pure of heart. So we won't repeat what we shared in that reflection. If anyone wants to look at it, I'm sure it's still on YouTube, the 6th Beatitude, our reflection there. One thing we will note and repeat before closing is that in the Catechism, paragraph 25:18, it says that this. It says, "Pure in heart refers to those who have attuned their intellects and their wills to the demands of God's holiness, chiefly in 3 areas. 1, charity. 2, chastity or sexual rectitude. 3, love of truth and orthodoxy of faith." There is a connection, says the Catechism, between purity of heart, of body, and of faith. Very interesting there. So we aren't pure of heart if, for example, we don't embrace all the truths of the faith. Charity, truth, chastity, they all go together. If you fall in one, if you fail in one, you're going to fail in the others as well. It's like a tripod for a camera, right? If one of the legs is broken, the tripod is practically useless at that point. So let's ask Our Lady today for the grace to have our thoughts and our desires line up with what is truly good and what is truly honorable in God's eyes. Let's also ask her for the grace to purify our minds and our hearts so that we can become more like her and more like her Son, which is God's plan for all of us. Praise be Jesus and Mary, now and forever.